stayed in the streets for 23 years prior to me being a drug addict of 23 years. My addiction led me into homelessness. After being homeless, I slept on the streets in a cardboard box downtown LA on 6th Street, on 6th and San Pedro. And I stayed down there for about 15 years. And oh my God, for about 15 years.
One, two, three, four.
Welcome to the Lean Podcast, Ladies Empowerment and Alignment Network. I'm your host, Mahogany, and this is Season 2. Let's start with a short prayer. God, I pray this season speaks to every heart listening. May these stories ignite purpose, restore hope, and remind each woman that she is never alone. Amen.
Amen.
Hello, y'all. What is up? Welcome back to Season 2 of the Ladies Empowerment and Alignment Network podcast. Today we have with us Miss CeCe Edwards. She is a mom, a grandmother, an entrepreneur, a founder of Ouch on the Couch Ministries, as well as a sponsor and a minister. Help me welcome Miss CeCe to the podcast. Yay! Y'all, today Miss CeCe is going to have a very real conversation with us about some of the things in life that she has been able to overcome to be this woman with all these amazing titles that you see her as today. I know a lot of times we see people in the limelight or we see them doing their thing and it's like, man, that's a powerful person. But a lot of times we have a serious story behind why we're so powerful. And today I can't wait to hear how you did that, CeCe. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Mahogany, for your podcast. I truly appreciate you having me. It's been a long time coming. I'd like to start off by speaking scripture, okay? And the reason being is because this is what got me to where I'm at today. So I'm going to start with First Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. And it talks about you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. I never knew that I was chosen. I didn't understand the reason why my life was the way it was growing up. At the age of 5, I had become a full-blown alcoholic. Reason why is because I come from a long line of dysfunction. I can remember we had card games a lot at my family's home. And I can remember that I was the little kid that used to walk around at the tables and wanted to sip out of everybody's drink, not knowing that that was opening up a portal for me to become alcoholic. I liked it the way it made me feel. I liked it the way it took me outside of my body. But what happened was that it had opened up a spirit. It had opened up a spirit for predators to prey on this little 5-year-old. And so at the age of 7, I was molested by a family member due to the fact that we had aunties that used to say, girl, get on out there and dance for such and such, and this, that, not knowing that what they were doing was opening up doors for me to be fondled. And that's what happened with me. It happened and it stayed in my life, that person, for a very long time. When it was exposed, the door of manipulation was opened for me because now I knew how to manipulate men. So every time this family member would come over, he would give me hush money, not to say anything. So I grew up knowing how to manipulate men. And those doors was open for many years for me. I didn't understand why my aunt, once it got exposed, why she stayed with this person. And so I grew very rebellious for the women in my family. I thought they were weak. I thought they were submissive, but she was too submissive for me, right? And
Mhm.
I grew up saying, I'll never be that person. So I lost all respect for women. Then at 8 years old, my father walked out of our lives, left me with my mom, and took one of my sisters with him, and I still didn't understand why that had happened. So then I suffered from abandonment issues. I walked along with that for for many years. I carried that into my teenage life. By the time I got into the sixth, seventh grade, junior high school, I can remember I was getting bullied by these two big old girls. And I was a little frail little kid in elementary. But then when I got in junior high school, I felt like I was picking up a little weight. And for some reason, the spirit of fear stepped in. These big old girls, my giants, yeah, my giants was when I realized that something was in me. The rage took place in me. Those portals from that little girl that got molested, the alcoholic had got molested. But see, I started back drinking again when I was in junior high school. So that thing woke up again and I became this other person. And I remembered that person from being 5 years old. And I started to fight and I started to get in trouble and I started these other little things and it opened up a portal for other drugs and other things. And I became very promiscuous, very promiscuous. I remember that. Wanted to, have sex very early, not knowing that, my body, I used it for a lot of demoralizing things growing up in my life. And it was really sad. But again, I did what I knew how to do at that time. I was always told, oh, you're so pretty, you're so this, you're so that, but not realizing that I used my outer beauty to manipulate the things that I wanted out of life. And I did that for so many years. It wasn't until I became one of the biggest dope dealers in Los Angeles, the time I became an adult and having my own children. I was coming in and out of prisons and jailhouses and transporting drugs and this, that, and the other until I became my biggest customer. And what I mean by that is that I started to test my own product. I to a heartache of, and when I say heartache, that means I fell into love, but it was really lust. I know that now, but back then I was love for me, right? I'm in
Mhm.
love with this man. This my baby daddy. This my husband, and he broke my heart, and he cheated, and I brought him back, and he cheated, and I brought him back, and we went back and forth with that for many years, and I cheated, and I knew how to do that very well, and so we went through this trial period, and um, that's who I was. I became a stripper, and I started doing some things in life that I'm not too proud of. In the process of that, I had multiple children that ended up being products of the system. Um, and then, as I started testing my own product, it became my master. And what I mean by that, it became the ruler of my life. I lost sight of values. I lost sight of my morals. I lost sight of my spirituality. I lost sight of my children. And when I gave them over to the Department of Children's Services, which I was still angry. So I lied to people and I told them, look, the Department of Children's Services came and just took my children, not taking accountability of the things that I had done throughout my life that led up to the reason why they had been taken. Prior to that, I stayed in the streets for 23 years prior to me being a drug addict of 23 years. My addiction led me into homelessness. After being homeless, I slept on the streets in a cardboard box downtown LA on 6th Street on 6th and San Pedro. And I stayed down there for about 15 years. And oh my God, for about 15 years. And after staying in that place, I lost my voice. Literally, like I couldn't talk anymore. I became psychotic to the point to where I could not stand to be indoors anymore because I've done so many wrong things that I never thought that God or anybody else would ever be a part of my life or be loved because of who I was and the things that I did over the years. And I wore everything that I owned on my back. My hair was matted to my head, and I did that for many years. Um, I'll never forget. I was walking down Central Avenue mm, and 5th Street, and I was coming across this red light, and a horn was honking, and this woman walked past me, and she looked at me, and she said, "There is a queen underneath all that rubbish." And I never forgot that. And for some reason, something just clicked. I don't know what clicked. I don't know what happened, but I knew that moment right there that there was some hope still left in me. I went back to my box, and at the time we had named the cardboard boxes cardboard condominiums at the time. And I went back there, and I remember sitting there, and all I could recite in my head was the Maya Angelou poem, Phenomenal Woman. That's all I can remember. But my mind was just blank of everything. I didn't remember my children's name. I didn't remember my mom. I didn't even remember where I stayed last, right? But I can remember that poem, and I would recite it in my head over and over and over again. I remember having a fight with someone, and I ended up in the hospital, and I ended up in jail before the judge because I always had blackouts. I always, ended up in jail or in a hospital or something because I would have blackouts after I would drink and do whatever it was that I was doing over the years of using drugs, right? But this very last time when I ended up in jail before the judge, she told me, she said, "Miss Edwards, I'm about tired of seeing you here. I think this time we really need to put you in a program." She said, "Either you're going to do a program or you're going to do 14 years. And I told my attorney, the public defender, I said, "I'll do a program." Now, I have been doing programs over the years, and I have been kicked out of 13 treatment centers, but for some reason this time, I think I just needed to go somewhere. And so I went to this program, and I stayed there for a little bit, but for some reason I couldn't sit there. I left, and I ended up meeting this man who was a deacon of a church, and he became my abuser. Um, and I lost all faith in God. From there, I ended up going to a domestic violence shelter, and didn't know going to that domestic violence shelter, I was pregnant by this deacon. And I prayed and I said, God, I'm pregnant. And every child that I've had has been taken through the system. If you give me this baby, I will serve you for the rest of my life. Ended up going to treatment. I went to the domestic violence shelter. I stayed there until after I had my baby. And I was surprised because the last four children that I had, every time I would have a child, the Department of Children's Services would be in the room and would remove the children out of my arms because I was still actively using, right? So I was in fear. So I hadn't, my last child that happened to, I hadn't had a child for over maybe 7 years. So this last baby that I had, which was my eighth child, after praying that prayer, and I went into the domestic violence shelter, and I stayed there until it was time for me to have the baby. And when I went into the hospital, and they were able to release me, and they were like, "We're releasing you guys," and I'm looking at the nurse like, "You mean releasing both of us?" And he was like, "Yeah." So as they brought us the car seat and they was getting the baby ready and putting her in there, and I was saying like, "Are you releasing me and the baby?" And they was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh my God." So my friend that was in there with me, I was like, "Girl, did you hear what they said? They giving me the baby back." And I look, she's like, "Yeah, come on, let's go." So now I'm thinking criminality, like, am I still in this baby? Do DHS know that? You know what I'm saying? So I went to the place, to the program, went back to the program from the hospital, and I kept the baby. And I raised this child. And I felt that feeling again, what it felt like to be a mother again. I raised my three oldest children, but the children in between was the ones that was most affected by my drug use. But this last baby just was my miracle child. When she turned one, we left the program. I ended up going back to her father, which was the deacon of the church, thinking that things were going to get different, and it didn't. And I think I had like 18 months sober, but I didn't have sobriety. I didn't have recovery. And it's a difference. I just was dry. I didn't have any tools to, to stay sustainable in my sobriety, right? So I ended up relapsing for a short time, very short time, because of his manipulation again. I didn't have a God, like I told you. He was a deacon, but so he manipulated the scriptures. I wanted to be a woman of God, I wanted to be a wife. So he would tell me different scriptures and I would abide by them, but he made it to where I was just a slave in this house. And I was like, this can't be right. So I stopped going to the church that he was pastoring at, and I went to another church. And I ended up going to this church and talking to these women in this Bible study. And I'll never forget, these women told me, I said, so we was in Bible study and they was talking about the Bible. And I was like, no, that ain't what my fiance said. She said, honey, that is not what the word says. And after that, I started going to this other church. I started building up my faith. I left him again because I did relapse. I started drinking. I said, you know what? I got to leave. And I went to another domestic violence shelter in West Covina, California. In that domestic violence shelter, by me relapsing, the treatment center found out that I had other children years ago, in the 90s, that was in treatment, and they tested me. Um, they tested me and I was dirty. I had like about 15% of crack cocaine in my system, and they came and got my daughter, my baby. and they kept her. And I cried, and oh my God, I cried. And so when I went before, and let me tell you how God is. The same social worker that I had way back in those years was the same social worker that came and got her. So this lady, she didn't like me. She said, I'm gonna make sure you don't get this back because you went right up under our noses. So let me tell you, so when I went before the judge, tell you how good when favor is on your life. Went before the judge, and the judge told me, he said, Miss Edwards, if you can come back in 90 days, matter of fact, 6 months, and show me that you're going to keep yourself sober and stay in this program and do what you need to do, I'll return your baby. I said, what? Okay. I stayed in that domestic violence shelter in West Covina. I did what I needed to do. That was in 2012. Um, After staying in that program, I stayed there for about 18 months because in that program they had transitional housing afterwards. And so they returned my daughter. I advocated for myself by being there. I went back to college, which I ended up getting my degree in social work. And I became a domestic violence counselor. And I ended up working in that very domestic violence shelter. Prior to that, I stayed there, moved out of there. After moving out of that shelter, I started to do the work. And the reason why I spoke more about being in recovery, but being sober, but not having recovery is because I had to do some steps in order to do some inside work that the little girl in me still needed to heal. So I didn't know that the first 3 years of my sobriety, I stayed out of relationships. I stayed out of being involved with men, women, whoever, in order to learn who CeCe was, to learn how I can be empowered to help other people, to help because I knew that I needed, this was my passion to help other women be all that they can be. I ended up representing my own self when I had to go and advocate for my daughter. I ended up representing my own self when I had to go and get my record expunged due to the fact that there was some false allegations that was against me when I was facing 14 years to life. So these are some things that had kept me stagnated in my life up until today. Right now, I am 13 years clean and sober. And by doing that, what I have done today is I've opened up a transitional house here in Oregon. I left California um, after finding my father after 23 years because being in my addiction, someone told my father that I had overdosed and they found my body in a dumpster. And so all these years my dad had thought I was dead until my sister that lives here in Oregon saw one of my oldest daughter on Facebook, thank God for Facebook, and said, is your mother named CeCe? And she's like, yeah. Is she still living? She said, yeah. She said, well, I'm your auntie and I need to find her. And so she called me. She said, Mom, your sister is looking for you. And I was like, okay, what's her name? And she told me her name. I was like, yeah, that is my sister. Give her my number. So when she called me, her and my dad was on the phone. They was crying. My dad said, listen, I'm not losing another kid. And let me go back. Prior to me being in my addiction, I lost my mom. I lost my dad. I couldn't even show up or put that pipe down long enough to even grieve those times. So being sober and doing some work within myself, those things that I had embedded so deep inside my spirit, I had to go through those pains all over again. I had to go through all that trauma all over again. I had to um, dig up all that childhood trauma all over again in order to be who I am today. And so, right now, what I do is I grab a hold of some of these women that's in recovery, and I take them through the work. And I take them through the work line by line because I don't want them to miss the mark. I don't want them to miss that piece that that little girl in them still shows up. Sometimes we still don't know that we have these temper tantrums, that we don't see them showing up when we want to act out on our boyfriends, and we don't know that that's the little girl that's showing up in me. You know what I'm saying? The little teenager that's still showing up in me. Why I'm not healed yet, I don't know, but I think I need to look at myself. What part am I playing in this situation, right? And so turning my mirror inward is one of the things that I love about the platform that God gave me in a dream and the Ouch on the Couch